Shrek is one of the most popular characters in fiction since the age of the internet, and you know better than anyone that even that might be an understatement. I can't be bothered to write an intro, so let's just get straight into it. Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll. The first Shrek film is the one that put DreamWorks on the map. It's what solidified them as a worthy opponent to the wildly dominant Pixar, who were in their prime. But somehow, DreamWorks managed to keep up, releasing this film in the same year as Monsters Inc., and in my opinion, releasing the stronger of the two films. One of the reasons for this is the crassness that these films all have. Due to perhaps DreamWorks being a company with less eyes on them, there was less pressure to conform to family standards. And so it really is the ideal family film. By crassness, I mean words like ass and damn, which are pretty surprising, but definitely nice to hear. It'll be enjoyed by adults and also kids because it's cool and edgy and there's some personality about it. Especially in this scene that really caught me off guard, where Lord Farquaad has a boner in a children's film. It completely slipped my mind as a child, but now watching it, it's kind of amazing. Shrek as a character is essentially just a big fuck you to Disney, and that's one of my favorite parts of this film. The first thing that happens is that Shrek wipes his ass with the traditional Disney fairy tale formula.
Yeah. Like that's ever gonna happen. What a load.
The brave knight is an ogre, the noble steed is some clapped donkey. Supposedly many of the people who worked on this film actually came from Disney to work for DreamWorks, and they throw in subtle digs at the company who are apparently mistreating them, and it gives the film so much soul. The design of Lord Farquaad was based off of Disney's chairman and chief executive officer at the time, Michael Eisner, and they just made him some short ugly twat whose name is a euphemism for fuckwad, and they gave him a fat head, which is hilarious. I love that shit. Even if we put all the meta Disney digs aside, we're still left with a great animated movie. Shrek himself really carries the film. He is a phenomenal character, which is sometimes difficult to remember because he's just such a fucking meme now. But no, he is legitimately written impeccably, and the film does a great job making you like him. He's actually a shockingly cute and wholesome character, and I particularly enjoyed how his ears emote along with him, a detail they sort of got rid of in the other films for some reason. The same thing can be said with most of the characters here. They're all incredibly likable and developed, no doubt aided by the magnificent cast. Thanks to Austin Powers, Mike Myers was on top of the world in 2001, and the voice he gave Shrek is not only very endearing, but also made him somewhat of a hero in Scotland, sort of like Rocky is to Philadelphia. Funnily enough, Chris Farley was the original voice of Shrek, but passed away before completion.
I like my cockles room temperature.
It's difficult to tell whether the film would have been better or worse with or without his contribution. If I had to guess, I'd say it would be roughly the same in terms of quality. Farley's version of Shrek seems almost like a different character, and it would have been a very different movie. He seems a lot more family orientated and focused on his parents and how he was raised.
Yes, someone hurt you so bad, someone hurt you many years ago.
Leave my parents out of this!
Breakthrough!
Which would have actually been an interesting angle to take the story. Mike Myers, not wanting to live up to Chris Farley, demanded that they rewrote a lot of these lines, so I'm guessing that's why we don't get information about Shrek's parents throughout the entire quadrilogy, especially considering parent stories are something that DreamWorks love to do. The main flaw about Mike Myers' Shrek is his inability to handle his emotions, and it's done very well.
Who you trying to keep out? Just tell me that, Shrek. Who?
Everyone, okay?
He just sort of freaks out and gets angry because he's scared and lacks experience, but it feels very natural and very charming. The Scottish accent really adds a warm feeling to him.
Fucking move, you fat dick!
Mike Myers is surprisingly reserved here, and Shrek is quiet when he needs to be. It really does add a layer of tenderness to the character.
They judge me before they even know me.
A character who really and truly does have layers, and meme aside, the onion analogy is actually quite a nice touch. It's genuinely a good little piece of writing. And Shrek himself is surprisingly complex. You have the aforementioned tenderness and emotional instability, there's some self-hatred thrown in there, he's annoyed by Donkey but also quite cares for him. In terms of negatives, the animation is pretty stiff at points due to the time and didn't age amazingly. It mostly holds up because luckily the character designs are really good, and the lighting and storyboarding leads to it looking shockingly appealing even today. It's just some of those janky movements from one pose to another that's a little stiff at times, as well as some of those weak textures. Fiona's ogre version particularly really does look ugly, and not in the way that they were intending, but in the future movie she looks fine. One other thing I really didn't like was the plot itself, especially the conflict between Shrek and Fiona, which seemed incredibly forced and ironic for a film designed to flout the genre's trope. Whenever films have miscommunications, like just so happening to hear the wrong part of a conversation from a character who's speaking in an incredibly unnatural natural demeanor for the miscommunication to happen. In this case, Shrek thinking that Fiona's talking about him when she's just saying how ugly she thinks she is or whatever.
I heard enough last night.
You heard what I said?
Every word.
I thought you'd understand.
Oh, I understand. Like you said, who could love a hideous, ugly beast?
You know, something that would realistically be solved in an instant but isn't for whatever reason. It's one of the laziest tropes in movies and incredibly lazy writing. Fortunately, this aspect of the film only takes up like 10 minutes, and it's not completely unbearable because of the comedy, the quick pacing, the chemistry between Shrek and Donkey, all of which keeps it fun and lively. Oh, also, the singing, dancing, epic party thing at the end works here, but I hate the awful trend of dance scenes that started during the conclusion of animated films. Shrek made DreamWorks a force to be reckoned with, and without the character, DreamWorks would be a shadow of what they are today.
Alright, big fella, let's crash this party!
The general consensus among Shrek fans is that one of these first two movies is the best one, but I've never struggled deciding which one of these is better, Shrek 2 being the absolute superior of the two. There's just a lot more going on. I will say that I think I slightly prefer the first act of the original Shrek, but the sequel's second and third act very much edge the first one. I won't spend too long on this movie because most of what I said about the previous film applies here, and I don't want to repeat myself too much. One very obvious improvement is in terms of animation. The movie looks incredible, and speaking of incredible, this film came out in 2004, the same year as Pixar's The Incredibles, and to be honest, Shrek 2 looks a lot better. Some other improvements include some of the characters. I think Prince Charming and the Fairy Godmother are far more entertaining than Lord Farquaad. There was one moment with the Fairy Godmother particularly that referenced FGM, which really caught me off guard. It's just so interesting that you could sneak stuff like that into a children's film at the time. That shit would never fly today. Ever! I mean, could you imagine? Fucking hell. Puss in Boots is a welcome addition to the cast, and there was an alien reference with him that I actually thought was really funny. The biggest improvement was probably the climax of the film. The structure of the original was extremely fast-paced and it concluded very quickly, whereas in this one there's a lot more build-up, higher stakes, more action, a better payoff, and it's all aided by an amazing soundtrack. Speaking of which, the soundtrack for these films is something I failed to mention before, but it's pretty great. The songs they choose to use and cover are suitable for the most part, and Smash Mouth, despite being such a meme nowadays, is used amazingly in film. All Star is unironically a really good catchy tune with a nice message that makes sense for Shrek. As well as the covers and secondary songs, the original score and main theme is way better than it has any right to be. I mean seriously, even Shrek as a movie was better than it had any right to be considering what it was about. So the fact that they were able to do it again, DreamWorks fully killed it with this one. I think the humor in this film overall lands better than the first one. I laughed more here. I think the emotional beats also work a lot better, all things considered. I think a lot of the character interactions are funner to watch, like the family dinner scene was a personal highlight for me. I will say that a lot of the character beats are a little too similar to the first film. I feel as if Shrek's self-hatred shouldn't be as potent in this sequel. It's a tad too major of a plot point here, and it would have been nice to see the character taken from a different angle. Some other complaints I have with this film is that whilst most of the jokes hit, there are a few misses, which whilst the fast pacing does help, a lot of the pop culture references sometimes go a little too far, and they do age the film slightly. It's the beginnings of the DreamWorks that I don't like. Stuff like, there was a Mission Impossible reference thrown in there, some of the shoehorned music choices and jingles don't fit as well as the others. You can almost see the seedlings of the DreamWorks that made Boss Baby and Trolls being planted here. Seeds that are about to take full bloom with... Fucking hell, that was a good recording as well, mate. Seeds that are about to take full bloom with... this. Shrek the Third. Shrek. Where do I even start with this one? This movie is fucking ass. I'm sorry, but it's total shit. Worthless, never should have been released. Go fuck yourself, you useless troglodyte pathetic movie. To start off with, the jokes are awful in this one for the most part. Let's take this joke, for example.
Oh, man, I haven't been on a trip like that since college.
This joke is shit. First of all, the body swap adds absolutely nothing to this film. Which, admittedly, there's a lot in this film that adds nothing. Entire characters given significant screen time could just be removed with minimal effect on the plot. There are really only 3 characters with any effect on the story, and that's a real problem when Donkey, Puss, and Fiona have no usage in a Shrek film, for God's sake. Also, donkeys don't go to college. Even in this fairy tale world, the joke has nothing to do with fairy tales like the edgy jokes did in the last film. This one's just edgy for the sake of being edgy. I know you might think I'm nitpicking, but the joke needs to have some sort of logic behind it. Otherwise, it's just a funny random, which this film also has a surplus of. It's chock-a-block full of the wanker writers, including shitty, random humor. The introduction for this movie is insulting, and they can't decide whether or not they want to play the king's death for funny or emotion, so they just went, fuck it, let's try both. And all it did was leave for a confused and dumb tone. There's like some weird cover of Live and Let Die, a song that I love but isn't used fittingly at all here. When Shrek is about to leave to find the new heir on a boat, Fiona doesn't tell him that she's pregnant. They stand there on the dock for what feels like 40 fucking minutes. But Fiona doesn't say anything until Shrek is far away on the boat, just so that they can make this joke. That's not even fucking funny. Then Shrek goes to high school, and everything is annoying. This has nothing to do with fairy tales, it's just a normal American high school with Shrek there. And it's only in the film for like 5 minutes, so it didn't have any point at all, really. We meet the new heir, Justin Timberlake, and he's the worst part of this film. He's voiced poorly, and he's given the most trite lines ever written by DreamWorks.
Really? Wow.
Prince Charming returns as a villain because the people working on this film were very lazy. And it really alerted me of how important the villain is in these movies, because I realized while watching this that Prince Charming was never a good villain. He only worked when his mama's boy quirks were counted with the fairy godmother's genuine villainy. Now he's just a mummy's boy. There's nothing scary or intimidating about a mummy's boy. He's not funny, he's just annoying. Why is Justin Timberlake a loser? Why is he bullied by nerds? We are given no reason as to why this character is worth bullying. He doesn't look like a loser. He doesn't act like a loser. He just seems like a normal dude. Why is a normal dude an integral character in what's supposed to be a phantasmagorical Shrek film? Fiona and some princesses are captured or some shit, and there's a big girl boss sequence where shit like this happens, and I want to kill myself. Oh yeah, there's also this part right here.
Mom.
Well, you didn't actually think you got your fighting skills from your father, did you?
What? That's really dumb and stupid. Why can't this film do anything that isn't dumb and stupid? Should you not have just done that from the start when they were imprisoned initially? Look, I could go on all day, but I'm just gonna skip. The climax of this film pales in comparison to the second one. I mean, seriously, who the fuck thought this was a good idea? It's just so boring and so plot convenient, and Justin Timberlake saving the day is ridiculous. There are way too many new characters that are way too two-dimensional considering how important they are to the plot, but also somehow no one is important to the plot. Seriously, what do Donkey and Puss add to this film? They don't do anything, they just tell bad jokes. The soundtrack is awful, which I sort of already touched upon. The needless pop culture references that DreamWorks have become notorious for are in full force here. The animation somehow got worse and looks more like the first one. Perhaps they got too ambitious and tried to put too many things in, but it's notably stiffer. Alright, let's move on to the things I like. As usual, Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy do a great job voicing their characters. It really feels like breathing to them at this point, it's just so natural. Shrek shows clear growth from his previous first and second movie self, which is a nice contrast to Justin Timberlake's parallels to Shrek's former self, and makes for some genuinely emotional heart-to-hearts. Some of the jokes and gags are pretty good.
I've always wanted to play the flute.
And I do like the idea of the king dying and Shrek being next in line. It's like one good writer worked on this film but was overpowered by a group of shit ones. And by the end of it, Shrek doesn't become king and it's just given to Justin Timberlake. So I guess the moral is just run away from your responsibilities and someone else will do it for you. It's not quite as poignant a moral as the other films, but whatever. Could the Queen not have just ruled solo? I don't even give a fuck. Fuck you, this movie sucks. Shrek Forever After is the Avengers Endgame of the Shrek franchise, where they sort of just wave around member berries and like, oh, do you remember this old place from the other two movies? Presumably as a tactic of reviving the goodwill that was lost in the last one. and it has time travel and stuff, and it's surprisingly not bad at all. It might even be my favorite, in fact. This movie is less focused on dumb jokes and really hones in on the character of Shrek, and it's way more emotionally centered than the previous three. It's definitely not as funny as the first two, but it's a lot better at hitting the emotional beats, which I guess I value more as a viewer. It's also about 600 times billion better, fucking trillion times better infinity than Shrek the Third, which isn't saying much, but yeah. To start off with, Rumpelstiltskin is an actually good villain. I don't find him as funny as the first two, but he's threatening, his motivations make sense, he's voiced well, and he actually acts villainous. It's about time the morals of these movies move on from just accepting yourself or whatever, because we've already seen that 3 times by this point, so it's a nice change of tone to have the moral be appreciating what you have. Shrek himself is an amazing catalyst in which to portray these morals too. He's pretty unlikable at the start of the film, but it makes sense and the film does a good job making you understand the reasons behind his actions.
Back when the world made sense.
You mean back before you rescued me from the Dragon's Keep?
Exactly.
Even when he eventually signs the waiver, he's conflicted at first, and it takes him a while to agree to it. If this exact plot point was in the third film, he would have just signed the waiver to move the plot along. It's nowhere near as derivative here. It's very much a DreamWorks film. The company really enjoys these simple ideas like hordes of a main character that they didn't know about. Like the Ogre Gang here is very reminiscent of the Panda Village in Kung Fu Panda 3, the dragons from the third How to Train Your Dragon, and also the zebras from Madagascar 2. They're also a fan of ideas of parent stories and having like a parent that you never knew about. But like I said before, I feel like they didn't go too in-depth on Shrek's parents here because of Mike Myers' demands that they change the script from Chris Farley's version. The writing in this film is also notably fucking good. If you asked me to recall a line from the Shrek franchise, it would probably be a line from this film.
Don't you get it? It's all just a big fairy tale.
Fiona, don't say that. It does exist.
And how would you know?
But I'm your true love.
Then where were you when I needed you?
Whilst the plot points and story beats are somewhat expected and almost cliche, the way that every scene weaves together so seamlessly and logically is so poignant that it really disappoints me that DreamWorks has almost given up on this kind of filmmaking.
No. The kiss didn't work. Because Fiona doesn't love me.
This film came out the same year as Megamind and How to Train Your Dragon, and Kung Fu Panda 2 was just a year later. What an absolutely incredible film catalogue in the span of only 2 years. I mean, there was also Puss in Boots, but fucking whatever, it doesn't really, no one really watches Puss in Boots. Let's take this scene as an example of some brilliantly done dramatic writing. It's probably one of my favourite scenes that DreamWorks has ever made. It starts off with Shrek singing... I can't talk when I do these fucking voiceovers for too long. I can't talk! Alright, let's try this again. It starts off with Shrek singing to Donkey in an attempt to convince him that they were friends, and it's without a doubt the funniest part of this film.
All you've got to do is call.
Aided by the stunningly detailed animation, the brilliant vocal performances, something that I really wish I could fucking do. It reminds me of the scene in Shrek the Third when Shrek was doing a similar thing to Justin Timberlake. The only difference being it's not as terrible here.
Oh, no, you didn't.
After Donkey runs off, Shrek finds his daughter's doll and comes to the realization that he has, really and truly, fucked his life up royally. He had everything. 3 beautiful children, a wife that loved him, and friends who adored him. And due to his own fuck up and the deviousness of Rumpel, it all comes to an end, and he's lost it all forever. This is made especially powerful by Shrek not immediately regretting his harsh outburst at Fiona at the start of the film, as most animated movies would have written their characters to do in an attempt to make them seem more noble. The writers here were not afraid to make Shrek realistically hateable in a way that makes sense. Continuing with this scene in question, Shrek cries for the one and only time in the entirety of the quadrilogy.
I've never seen a ogre cry.
Every other time Shrek has lost something or been depressed, at the very least he had a swamp to go back to.
I'm not crying.
But not this time. There is no swamp, everyone hates him, and the real kicker, It's all his fault. Donkey, having seen this moment of vulnerability, decides to give Shrek a chance, and Eddie Murphy fucking kills his role here. In Shrek Forever After, the characters were at their absolute best. I thought Puss was funnier in this movie than any other one. I really liked Fiona. Actually, I liked all the characters just thinking about it. And all the VAs have really sunk into their I mean, I seriously can't get over how great the casting is for these films. Nowhere is this more evident than the climax of the film, which has some really thoughtful imagery, some solid action, which admittedly isn't anywhere near as good as Shrek 2, but it's the second best climax in the franchise, so take it or leave it. And once again, this movie is more focused on its emotional density. At the end of it all, we get unironically one of the best lines that DreamWorks has ever written.
You know what the best part of today was? I got the chance to fall in love with you all over again.
In Shrek's mind, those were his last words. He doesn't think he's coming out of the other end. This is it for him. Probably my biggest complaint for this film is that I genuinely would have loved to see a movie where he doesn't end up surviving. I mean, could you imagine just how much of a punch this would have had if Shrek died here? God, it might have been one of the best, most notable deaths in film, period. As it happens though, he survived because fucking whatever, it's the baby's film. And it's not a bad ending at all, it's still pretty alright, and it resolves the arc, and it makes sense, and it fits the character, and it's feel good, and it's just a really nice, peachy moment with some more great lines of dialogue.
You know, I always thought that I rescued you from the Dragon's Keep.
You did.
No, it was you that rescued me.
It also does a great job at being conclusive, using I'm a Believer as a credits theme again, and it's stuff like that, as well as just the overall themes which are tackled here that make me really confused at the prospect of a fifth film. I mean, how can you get more conclusive than Shrek the Final Chapter? All of these movies have 3 years in between them, just leave it, seriously. Why would you ever want a fifth one by a DreamWorks that is a shell of the company that they once were? I'm pretty confident that if they end up making this film, they're really gonna fuck it up. The Shrek babies are gonna be teens or something, and if there's one thing we know about this franchise, it's that they can't write teenagers. The last thing I want to mention that's improved drastically are the visuals. This movie looks good. Really good. Almost a little too good. It's weird seeing Donkey's textures look as detailed as they were here. Now, I'm aware I've put more focus on the fourth installment more so than the others, reason being it's difficult to talk about movies focused on comedy for a sustained period of time without being really boring. It's a lot easier to talk about Shrek Forever After to me because drama and emotions are a lot easier to discuss fruitfully, and shit movies like Shrek the Third are inherently just easier to discuss. All these movies are on Netflix, which is tremendously convenient, and I think that they would be a great choice of movie to marathon. Just skip the third one though. In my mind, Shrek is a great trilogy. I don't count the third one because go fuck yourself, we're done here.